we'll be, I guess, following. We're going to talk about best practices, but really, this is probably, if you've been living under a rock for the last 2 months and you're just seeing this for the first time, we are going to give a little bit of background on TRESA and what it is. We've got this presentation that we're going to go through, and we'll see what we can do as far as getting through as much as we can today. And I think this will be our discussion for the next few weeks, amongst other important seasonal topics, of course. But the Trust in Real Estate Services Act 2002, this is now going to be effective as of December 1st. So let's get into our presentation. I will cue this up, Joanne and Christina, as I'm talking. If please, there is something you'd like to speak about and discuss, by all means, jump in and participate. I'm going to start off, and Theodora, of course, as well too. Theo, having your legal background has been really valuable in these discussions back and forth. And what about this scenario? What that's it, Theo, you've been great. And I think I'll just say again, I love complimenting management. The mindset is so important in leadership, and there's a lot of new terminology. There's new policy here. I think a lot of us, for the most part, most of the practices that are being introduced through TRESA, most of us have been conducting in such a way very similar to TRESA, and it really is just raising the bar to our clients and how we treat them, how we disclose them, how we are functioning with them in the best professional way. So again, having the mindset of the caliber of management that we do have with Christina and Theodora, Kevin up north as well, has been, it's a huge benefit as we're working through this. So phase one of TRESA, guys, it's already been completed. You all had your personal corporations if you chose to set those up. And new registrant descriptions and advertising terms permitted. This has already happened. This was phase one back in 2020. As of December 1st, of course, we're going to be reviewing the act. The Code of Ethics has been revised, of course. We're identifying what the duties of agents and brokerages are with customers, with regards to clients, self-represented parties, representation agreements. And if it sounds like we're making distinctions, and we're like, we are, and they are. This is what the clarity was all intended to do with TRESA: multiple representation, designated representation, brokerage representation. We're going to discuss open offers, forms, and the changes with those, which I think today they have officially rolled out. And then again, what our policies are within the brokerage. And I call them policies. Policies seem to be like, this is how we're going to do it. As Kevin mentioned, in weeks coming up to this, let's start them off as best practices first and see how they're working and how they're testing within the markets and scenarios. And then we'll revolve those into more so firm policies. And I think that really is a great concept. We're open, but again, always making sure that we're doing right by the consumer and by our agents as well. So that is phase two. And phase three, which will be coming, it's proposing administrative penalties, considering specialty certification programs, and advocating for better RICO oversight and restrictions to TRESA exemptions. Last week, I did kind of give a little bit of history and why we're here over the last number of years. I won't review that now, but advocating for better RICO oversight is definitely, this is their mandate is to protect the consumer, but there also has to be involvement with RICO, with enforcement of that, and that'll be in that phase three. So, okay. TRESA 2002, again, the term customer is no longer. We're going to be getting rid of that. Under REBA right now, client and customer have occasionally been confused for the public while interacting with registrants, okay? And so basically we're eliminating customer. That is no longer in TRESA. All customer or non-client AREA forms are going to be discontinued. So no more customer service agreement, that no longer. Everyone is a consumer or a prospect until an agreement of representation has been signed or a decision to be self-represented has been made. So customer service agreements that are signed before December 1st What would happen to existing customer agreements once this rule is changed? Customer agreements will be forced to expire on March 24th, as per TRESA, 120 days from December 1st, or on their natural expiry date if it's beforehand. All customers until then are now clients, and representation and duties are to be fulfilled by the agents. TRESA in 2002, RICO Information Guide. This we talked about last week. And this in this presentation we will be providing to agents will be hyperlinked to this RICO Information Guide. So all consumers must receive a copy of this RICO Information Guide. This will be the first step when dealing with a general consumer that is not your client. Previous clients engaging in a new trade must also be given this guide. Walk consumers through the guide prior to providing services or assistance. You will have to explain this document to the consumer, and the consumer will make a decision on whether they will wish to become a client or to be a self-represented party. And so some people are like, oh, what is that? Like, do I start this right away as of December 1st? Yes, you do. As clearly stated, if a new someone from your open house walks in, what is the first thing that you are to be doing? You can say hello. And at some point very soon, you will provide them with this documentation, and we'll talk about how that format will be, but they need to be educated. And this is what RICO's intention is. We want full disclosure, we want full understanding, we want full clarity, and it starts right here with this document. So there will be coming soon RICO online tool to facilitate electronic sharing of the information and disclosures to self-represented party. They will be providing an email confirmation to the agent that the form was indeed provided. And if the person acknowledges it was provided, then an email confirmation will be sent to the agent. This sounds like a great concept. We're in a day of technology. Can I give this in soft copy or digital format? Can I track if I sent that? Can I track if they opened it? This is something they're working on, which will bring a lot of relief to many of you. Is like, oh, I'm printing it off. Am I having to? There will be resolution, and there will be a desire to create convenience for the agent so that the flow of business can take place while informing the consumer, of course. Christina, just on a side note, is it a good idea I click through these links right now?
If you want to show, there's a lot of links throughout the presentation. Yeah. So I think we can get to them. This is just kind of an overview that the links will be there, but there's nothing right now that I wouldn't link through it right now. Okay, cool.
So again, all consumers must receive a copy of this RICO Information Guide, and it is to be explained, the contents of this guide. And of course, there are 5 sections in here, and these are all hyperlinked. Christina, well done. The guide contains 5 sections. Working with the real estate, here's the guide, 13 pages. We again overviewed it last week. So it's working with the real estate agent, knowing the risks of representing yourselves, very clear, signing a contract with the real estate brokerage, what that means, responsibilities, obligations to that, understanding multiple representation, this is going to be the crux that RICO wanted to bring clarity to, and how if you choose to make a complaint, which is a paragraph. Again, I will mention there's a lot of information in this guide, but I think it's very useful, it's very common sense, and it's just really laying out everything that we should be expressing to our consumers as they understand whether they need to be signing a contract. And really, I'm good with everything. Management is good with everything in this document. Very clear. There's nothing controversial or of concern in this document. It actually not only brings clarity to the consumer, it brings clarity to the responsibilities of the consumer and their obligations as well, as far as interaction, communication, and their conduct, which that has never been expressed before, and I really like that. What is a self-represented party? I'm sure if I if I asked everybody here, at this point, everybody is fully aware, self-represented party is a person who's involved in a real estate transaction and has decided not to hire a brokerage. Very simple. Self-represented party does not replace customer. I've heard many agents just say, yeah, it's really simple. It's replacing customer. Absolutely not. Words have great meanings, and the clarity of that is important. That is why we're changing. We're not just changing it because it's semantics. No, there's differences to it. Every consumer is not automatically a self-represented party. They must be involved in a trade and have declined representation and services by that brokerage. So if someone walks into your open house or you're at a party talking to someone and they're talking in concept, at this point, they are a consumer. They're not a self-represented party as of yet. There has to be a trade that they have declined representation and services by the brokerages. And I think that definition, again, Christina, is a very clear definition and brings a great peace to me. If I had any confusion before, what does that mean? So this is, again, decline representation involved in a trade on services by the brokerages. So really addressing the SRP, self-represented party, to address documenting self-represented party acknowledgements, confirmations, and consents. There are 8 new self-represented AREA forms, no representation and agreement forms. All forms are acknowledgements. So it's not like, hey, wait a second, you can't sign something if you're self-represented. No, these are acknowledgement forms. There's no obligations, there's no contracts to them. They are acknowledgement forms so that they are aware and we can show that we've actually shared those details with them. Setting the tone for a member interaction or assistance related to a member's client. And of course, the lawyers have brought this point up under the legislation, and I will bring this up because you'll hear it in the future. 13.3.1, a brokerage shall not enter into an agreement with a buyer or a seller for purposes of trading in real estate if the agreement does not include the provision of representation. So note the AREA self-represented forms are an addition to the TRESA prescribed mandatory. And then the guide here, we've got those links and disclosure forms. When interacting with an SRP, an agent cannot provide services, opinions, or advice. A self-represented individual that comes in, guys, to an open house, I'm self-represented, I've identified, I am self-represented. I've got some questions here. You are not to provide services, opinions, or advice. Do anything that would encourage the self-represented party to rely on your knowledge, skill, or judgment. Discourage them from working with another real estate agent or brokerage. This, in contrast to how we've been before, is totally different. I know it's new for many of you, but you can only assist the self-represented party as a service to a client. If you do not have a client in the trade, you cannot provide assistance. We're going to elaborate more on that. When a self-represented party seeks assistance, your natural inclination might be to offer help. However, before taking any action, consider your role in the transaction, reflect on the 4 questions below to proceed, and then proceed with care. First question, is this assistance a service to or incidental to a service to my client, and is it consistent with my client's instructions? If yes, proceed. Does this assistance benefit my client, and would it promote and protect their best interests? Can I provide assistance without sharing my opinions or advice with the self-represented party? And 4, can I provide this assistance without encouraging the self-represented party to rely on my knowledge, skill, or judgment? So words matter, as I've stated before. So let's get into the words. And here we are today with the definition. I do anticipate scenarios, and this is as we discussed. Further clarification scenarios will pop up that will require elaboration from RICO. And I believe those are done by way of updates as bulletins to the through RICO. So what is assistance? Let's chat about that. A person may have general questions or be seeking information about trading in real estate generally without a particular property in mind, or a person might be curious about the state of real estate market. Agents continue to be permitted to provide general information about trading in real estate. So you can do that. That clarity is there. A person may be a consumer, prospective client, a seller, or a buyer who wants to work with a real estate agent. Activities related to prospective clients continue under TRESA as they did under REBA. For example, listing presentations for prospective seller clients. As the language started rolling out initially, it was my number one concern with listing presentations. And I believe in our presentation here that has been linked back to the legislation as well. We have confirmation verbally from the registrar that business as usual in that regard. So I'm happy to see that. So here's some examples of assistance. A consumer calls you about a listing and asks you questions that require factual answers: number of bedrooms, square footage, when it was built. This is providing information. You are holding an open house and provide information sheets about the property to each person who views the property. This is providing information. You are speaking at an event about tips for buyers and sellers and answer questions from the audience. This is providing information. You are not creating implied representation agreements with people that are attending the session. Open house, you act as the tour guide through the home. You are providing assistance to the self-represented party as a service to your client. Mechanics of filling out an agreement of purchase and sale. You can hand over a pre-filled agreement of purchase and sale that has information that is found on the MLS, like the seller's name, address, legal description, chattels, exclusions. No clauses, no conditions. The SRP can take this to their lawyer for review. They are on their own. Now, on that last point, I don't know if I'd even bother doing that necessarily. But again, in that scenario, if it's a service to your seller client, that may be something that they will want you to do. Again, as we back up through these scenarios, open house, act as the tour guide, as that is an assistance to, yes, this SRP, but as a service to your seller client. I really want to just bring the distinction between when we speak in these terms, it's an assistance to the SRP as it is a service to your seller client. Those words have meaning behind those, and that's done in that way on purpose. When it stops being a casual or informal exchange of information or relates to a transaction, caution is required. For example, where a buyer begins to share information that is confidential, or you start to offer advice related to the sale or purchase of a specific property. Remember, must be a service to your client or incidental to a service to your client. Must promote and protect the best interests of your client, and must not include opinions or advice related to the transaction. So how do you know if someone is an SRP? Step one, all consumers must receive a copy of the RICO information guide. The consumer will make a decision on whether they wish to become a client or an SRP. Self-represented party, if they convey their intention to be an SRP, then proceed to step two. So step two, the information and disclosure to the self-represented parties. Agents must provide to the self-represented parties before assistance is provided. So there's two forms to a self-represented party. One is by a designated representation, and one is by a brokerage representation. And again, these are the 13 pages of what that RICO information guide looks like. Sorry, forgive me. This is the brokerage representation disclosure. It is 2 pages. So if we chose to be a brokerage where we're not going to have, say, designated representation, this would be the disclosure form for that, and there would be one for the designated representation as well too. There's two
And
different.
that one should actually be in there. The brokerage representation one shouldn't be in there. It should be the designated.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Well, there's, again, every brokerage has a choice, just so we're clear. Are we going to choose to be taking on designated representation? We're going to go into detail what that is. Or are we going to stay as a brokerage representation? We are at this point choosing to align with the designated representation. And again, we'll go through what that is in detail. So here's a scenario. You receive a call on your listing from an interested buyer who is a self-represented party. Can you show the property?
Yes, you can.
Thank you, Parth.
Thanks, Parth.
Showing this property is a service to your client. But first, step one, provide and explain the RICO information guide. So that has to be done. Step two, discuss and send the information and disclosure to self-represented parties forms. This may convert them when they are educated about what being a self-represented party actually means. If the SRP has stated they have already seen the guide and signed the forms, they didn't sign them with you, always follow step 1 and 2. So, you know, I've had people say a customer is just the same thing as self-represented party. By the actions you are taking, that is absolutely not correct, right? Because step 1 and 2 require actions. Words have meaning, your actions even stronger. So these actions here are very clear. You need to provide the RICO information guide, 13 pages, explain it. So that really is step 1. And once you've done that, then discuss and send the information disclosure about what it is, your self-represented party, and the acknowledgement of that with, again, with Century 21, will be applying designated representation. The same self-represented party would now like to view another property that is not a listing of your brokerage. Can you show the property?
Not unless you have a BRA sign.
Yeah.
Well, again, definitions are important, but yes, you're right. It is an SRP, so they are a self-represented party, and that's what they are. That question is what you do with them. So, can you show the property? This is no longer a service to your client. You cannot provide them services as an SRP for a listing that is not the brokerage. It is a natural reaction for everybody, as Parth just did, to problem solve in order to get to an outcome that you want. And yet, these are the legislations that are here to protect the consumers and bring boundaries to what was happening before that should have been happening. And so again, when we're black and white in these scenarios, if it's an SRP, you cannot show that property. And of course, the thinker, as Parth is, have the SRP enter into a buyer representation agreement signed that the property that is a property specific to the home that is being showed. Go over some of the information guide again, the RICO information guide, as a refresher of the benefits in using a professional. If the SRP is not comfortable with the solution, then you cannot further help them. Why would you want to, is the question, right? Guys, this is where I think as a management team, we all kind of suspect, you know, but what if this and what if that and what if this scenario? I don't want to call this the gray zone, but this is where you need to just be cautious. And again, never be in a position where we are implying agency, implying and exchanging our advice. If someone is self-represented and is proclaimed to be so, you have to tread lightly and with caution. So I think as the lawyers—
Trevor, can I add something here? You know, the language that they're using is you can't force a self-represented person, you know, into a BRA or into a listing with you, but you can explain to them the services if you become a client, because an SRP has the ability to change their mind at any time and become a client. So our presentations, our language is going to be very, very important. so that they are fully aware they are now prepared to give up their RP standing and become a client, and then you can take them out, sign them up on a BRA for property specifics, and you would be able to take them into other brokerages. But your language, as Trevor is saying, language is so important now.
And when in
And
doubt,
documentation.
yeah, when in doubt, guys, reach out to your managers is my, overall for discussion for the scenarios. This is a learning curve. You're not going to get it day one, 100%. As I was mentioning, the lawyer, when we're in these gray zones, this will be tested and elaboration from Rico, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, through bulletins for clarification in certain scenarios. There may be a scenario where this is potentially inappropriate to move forward with the VRA, depending on, again, specifics and what ifs. I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but as we move forward, clarity will continue to come to us as an industry in creating these boundaries for the consumer. So what if an SRP wants to submit an offer on your listing? This offer would be prepared by you and from the seller. So you can write an offer from the seller to that self-represented party, irrevocable, of course, by the seller to the buyer SRP. Whatever clauses or conditions you feel are a benefit to your seller and in the best interest of your client should be included, of course. Hand over the offer documents to the SRP and have them consult their lawyer. I think this is a very reasonable process, and I've heard of this happening previous in certain scenarios, and it's totally logical, and I like this. I do. As opposed to, by the way, there was a discussion point there, providing an offer with kind of standard details. Again, unless it was under full instruction from my seller to do so, I wouldn't be doing that necessarily. Again, I start to get concerned about the lines there, but okay. But again, as a best practice, this assistance is permitted as a service to your seller client. And again, that will be tested over the coming months, I'm sure. Scenario for the sale by owner. For sale by owner, your buyer client would like to view a property that is for sale by an owner. Can you show it? And how will the remuneration, that's a tough word for me, remuneration be paid? So the answer, of course, is yes, showing this property is a service to your buyer client, so you can do that. However, you cannot be paid by a self-represented party by that for sale by owner. Solution to this: multiple representation has potential to now occur. Talk to your buyer client now about multiple representation and get the consent to continue. If the buyer client agrees to multiple representations, now speak to the SRP seller about the seller limited services agreement, and it's a new form 230, I should say. And it will be with limited services. Again, devil's in the details. We're not about to dive into that just yet, but there's the list of those services need to be defined. Everything needs to be defined. You can tell lawyers wrote this legislation. Again, best practices, the assistance is permitted as a service to your buyer client. And of course, yes, we do dive into this. And multiple representation with the buyer there, this is form 326. This is an acknowledgement. So this will be multiple representation and a limited services to represent, of course, the seller in this scenario, but your buyer, it's multiple representation because the representation is being done by the brokerage to both the for sale by owner and by the your buyer, even though you have designated representation by that. But it does, there is a multiple representation for the seller, acknowledgement form, and one for the buyer. And the initial will go under that section I've identified in both.
Trevor, will they be available Friday in web forms?
Oh, yes. I believe today they will be available. The forms are being issued as of
Supposed to be
today.
Thank you.
And one thing that I've always taken great advice from Martin in this company, in the business of real estate, our instructions are most times defined through the forms that we are signing. If there is a question or you are confused at any point in time, as Michael is identifying, I need to see those forms. The answers lie in the language of those forms. So don't be afraid to, I'm confused, print it off, pull it up, and read word for word what you are signing, what it is saying there. The clarity is there.
And then I think next we did put in the seller's limited service representation. That's what I was mentioning to Aman and Aaron. Sorry, Trevor, we slid a couple of these in.
No, that's fine. So again, listing agreement, seller limited services representation agreement. This is for sale by owner. We are going to do a limited service representation agreement. So the designated representation here will need to be completed. You know, whether that be a designated representation by the agent, which indeed we will, that'll be identified. So agent's name goes here. Seller hereby represents and warrants that the seller is not a party to any other listing agreements for the property or agreement to pay commission to any other real estate brokerage for the sale of the property. Of course, that will need to be initialed there. And then again, in Schedule A, this is where it will be detailed what type of service you are providing. It could be, of course, walking through the house. This is the service showing the property, kind of obvious there. But in Section 2, their commission. In consideration of the brokerage listing the property, which is, this is what we're doing. It's a limited service to that. The seller agrees to pay the brokerage a percentage, and then you can actually have that discussion with that individual at that point. The confirmation of cooperation is changing. You guys have seen this before, but prior to listing brokerage, we have sections 1A, 1 and 2, but there has, of course, been changes to this, as we've just identified, multiple representation with limited service representation. And in Section 2, this scenario, property is sold by buyer brokerage. We would go and click on the by the seller in accordance with the seller limited service representation agreement. It's just really defining what's happening in the boundaries of this. And although the very first time you guys remember you saw Form 320, you were all confused. Ironically, after many years, some of you are still confused on which boxes to check. I'm teasing, but look, it's a learning curve. The first time you're seeing it right now, you might be a little bit overwhelmed. It's okay. We're going to read it again and again and again until you're comfortable with it. Contents of the written client agreements, regulations, effects on service representation agreements resulted in revisions to all listing and buyer tenant representation agreements. Revisions included, but they weren't limited to, a brokerage option to delegate designated representation. Identifying self-represented party relationships, client expiry dates, initials. No longer is it like just for the 6 months. Anytime the client needs to, could be for a day, that's got to be initial. Okay, possibility of limited services representation, because it, you know, of course you can go full on representation, or it can be limited, of course, just to actions showing properties, etc. Multiple representations, varied situations, revised brokerage service representation agreements, client agreements, content enhanced. Again, those are the revisions, some of the revisions to the agreements there. So representation options, as I mentioned before, a brokerage has two options to choose which route they're going to go. We're going designated representation, to be clear. So what's the difference? So brokerage representation, the brokerage and all of its agents represent you and must promote and protect the best interest. But one of the brokerage's real estate agents may be your primary contact. They provide referrals to other professionals you'll need, for example, home inspectors, lawyers, etc. Designated representation, this is, again, for December 1st, one or more of the brokerage real estate agents is your designated representation. You know, the agent represents you and must promote and protect the best interests. The brokerage and its other agents are required to treat you impartially and objective. If you take on that listing, those intentions, those prices, those scenarios that are very important or could change or sway the financial return for that client, those are to be kept with just you. They are the boundaries around that representation, which again was unclear or confusing at times in the past. Again, multiple representation means a designated representative or brokerage represents more than one client. We kind of get that with competing interests in the same transaction. Okay, that shouldn't be new to anybody. This can happen in different ways. And depending on the type of the representation agreement you and the other clients have with the brokerage. So again, brokerage representation, multiple representations exist when the brokerage represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, or two or more competing buyers are interested in the same property, even when the clients are working with different real estate agents. And again, that we'll dive into that a little further, but designated representation, multiple representation exists when the same real estate agent is the designated rep for both buyer and the seller in the same transaction, or two or more competing buyers interested in the same property. And on that last point, we were kind of discussing that. That was one of the things we were discussing last night. So if you can see on my screen here, again, Christina, you've done a great job kind of laying out where we are as of today with the brokerage when it comes to brokerage representation. The brokerage and all of its agents represent the client, whether it be a seller or buyer. The brokerage's agents are bound by the same duties and obligations to the client as the brokerage. This means the brokerage and all of its agents must promote and protect the best interests of the client. The brokerage and all of its agents owe an undivided loyalty to that client. The brokerage and all of its agents collectively represent the client and are considered to have access to confidential client information. RICO does not want this. This is one of the intentions they put this legislation. They do not like this. Multiple representation into the brokerage, whether you've got two clients, obviously per the image here, and we're representing both. So under the brokerage representation, multiple representation arises when the brokerage represents both the seller and one or more buyers in the same trade. The brokerage represents more than one competing buyer in the same trade, and under the brokerage representation, multiple representation arises even when each client is working with a different agent employed by the brokerage. So we understand where things are at right now. As of December 1st, if you chose to be brokerage representation, nothing changes. But yet, if you are choosing to roll out designated representation, under designated representation, the agreement remains between the client and the brokerage. One of the key differences between the two forms of representation is who is representing the client. Under designated representation, the agreement will identify one or more agents as the designated representative for the client. So it could be a team, it could be an individual performer, it could be a team, but it can't be the team name. It can be the individuals on that team. Okay, we're going to have questions around that. We'll elaborate a little bit further, but you can have more than one agent be the designated representative is my point there. The designated representation is the agent that will provide representation to the client and is responsible for promoting and protecting the best interests of the client. The brokerage and its other agents must treat the client objectively and impartially. So as a best practice, all listings of the brokerage will be deemed designated representation effective December 1st, unless otherwise approved by the broker of record. And of course, there may be scenarios where that takes place, but this is our policy best practice for now. So as of December 1st, designated representation, you've got an agent that is a designated representation relationship and agreement signed between them and the client. The DR rep, designated representative, has a duty to protect the confidential information of the client. This means confidential information such as the client's motivations, to buy or sell. Their financial circumstances, what they're willing to take, must not be shared with anyone else inside or outside the brokerage. Big difference from where it is today. Confidential client information cannot be shared with any agent who is not a designated representative for the client. Again, this is something as a brokerage we are going to be controlling and monitoring, of course, but you are not, as before, agents could speak to each other, and actually each agent had that representation prior to. No longer. The boundaries are being put up. You are not to discuss those motivations, financial circumstances, what they're willing to take, etc. Don't even try. Brokerage's duties under the designated representative. So this is our obligations. We are to protect each client's confidential information by ensuring that a designated representative does not disclose the information to any other agent employed by the brokerage or other person unless the client provides written consent or the disclosure is required by law. Treating the interests of the client that have entered into designated representation agreements in an objective and impartial manner, supervising every designated representative to ensure that they fulfill their duties under the designated representation agreement. In the event a designated representative is not able to represent a client, designating a different agent employed by the brokerage to the designated representative for the client, if the client agrees to the new arrangement. So again, really clean boundaries, really, I should say clear boundaries. You can see that the language is very firm. This isn't a you should or shouldn't do it. It is very clear. You know, there will be several mechanisms for RICO to come in and inspect without a complaint. This is part of the legislation that will be changing as well too. We are held to a higher standard, and again, throughout the entire intention of TRESA, this is to clearly lay out where the lines of responsibilities, obligations, accountabilities, liabilities, where those lie. As I was sitting with Theodora in the first meeting in Brampton a few weeks back, she just had one word on her piece of paper. Again, thinking as within legal terms, liability. That's what this is all about. Who's holding the liability? Is it you, the agent? Is it the client? Or is it the brokerage? They want to have clear boundaries. So if a complaint ever does come, you know exactly black and white where you stand. So again, designated representation without multiple representations. This is new and sometimes challenging to understand. Yet, if there is boundaries and those rules are followed, you can have all the intentions, reasons, financial situations protected by a designated representation agreement between the agent and a client, even though there may be two within the brokerage, one representing the buyer and one representing the seller. Under designated representation, multiple representation does not arise. So this is not multiple representation. If the brokerage's clients involved in the same trade are represented by different designated representative, the designated representatives can continue to actively represent the interests of their respective clients, and the services and the representation the clients receive are not impacted. So in concept, this can absolutely happen as long as the rules are followed.
And Trevor, if I can add to that, this was a really big complaint for consumers, clients before. If they wanted to purchase the brokerage's listing, it created multiple representation, and then both agents prior to designated representation were then to act like mediators, so clients felt like they lost their full service. They didn't like that. I want to be able to talk to my agent. I want to have that conversation. What should I offer? What should I change in this to get? Now it's clear. I love this. This is so clean and clear. The brokerage can now have a designated rep on the listing and a designated rep taking care of the buyer, and it doesn't create multiple representation. But guys, you have to keep privacy more than ever now. You should have been anyway, but more than ever, privacy.
Good. Multiple representation under designated representation. So here we've got under designated representation, if an agent is the designated rep for more than one client in the same trade, the agent must treat the interests of each of the clients in an objective and impartial manner. So this is if you're double ending the deal. Okay, I represent the seller under listing agreement. I represent the buyer under a buyer representation agreement. I'm double ending the deal. And as long as the disclosures are provided and the boundaries are all set and initialed and checked off in boxes, this is okay. But this is what multiple representation is when in a brokerage with designated representation. And it reduces the likelihood that the multiple representation will arise. Multiple representation will only arise when the same agent is designated representative for more than one client in the trade, as I mentioned. So best practices when handling multiple representations, regardless of the circumstances that lead to the multiple rep, it continues to be prohibited under TRESA unless the required disclosures are made. As I said, the brokerage makes best efforts to obtain an acknowledgement that the disclosures was received. If you're struggling with your paperwork before and not filling out those forms, it's not an option. You've got to get these forms and these acknowledgements initialed, signed, etc. After receiving the disclosures and considering their options, each client agrees to multiple representation. Each client provides written consent, allowing the brokerage to proceed. Timing of disclosure. As soon as either the brokerage or agent is aware that multiple representation has arisen, the required disclosure must be made to each of the clients involved. The brokerage and its agents can't take any further steps on behalf of any of the clients involved unless each of the clients involved agrees and provide their written consent. Disclosures and consent at the time of an offer is submitted is too late in almost all circumstances. So again, I've got a listing, offer presentation on Sunday night. Let's say a buyer comes to me on Friday, writes up the offer. We've now signed the buy, or let's say we've signed the buyer representation agreement in regards to that trade. I've got to disclose that to all parties at that point in time. Okay, disclosing and consent of the time an offer is submitted is too late. So what is that time allowed? That will be further elaborated on, I'm sure. But even as of today, like when you have got X number of offers, you have the same kind of constraint right now. You have to disclose it as soon as possible. Is it reasonable to give someone, hey, I got an offer on a property, and you're submitting an offer? I got 1 hour to do it. No, that's not appropriate. You will get infraction. You will get in trouble for that from RECAL. But what is that time? That needs to be further defined. Unless either Christina, Tio, or Mom, if you've seen that time defined, I have.
It's that gut feeling. It's that gut feeling. Those conversations you have when you know that you've spoken to a consumer, that maybe they're a potential buyer. You like where the conversation's going. That's that gut feeling where you're like, yep, that's it. I got to talk to my seller because I think I'm going to bring this buyer through the door. That is the first moment that you would disclose multiple representations in your daily, that's the timing in your conversations and the scenarios, because RICO, I'm sure this will be one of their biggest ones that they're going to come after people with, is to ensure that you can prove, and that's what it's going to be. When did you send it? What's the timestamp? And relay that all back when an offer came, when everybody knew. So just send it out as soon as you have that gut feeling where it could be a possibility.
Yeah.
And of course, it will lead to deep walks in the mud, because again, what defines when you're sure an offer is coming? It's when an offer is signed. Now, so somewhere in between when you're pretty sure there's one coming or one is signed. I think there's still going to be much debate over that yet. We don't have any, there's not been a clear, here's when you have to send it. But agents who hold back once they've got a signed offer and don't disclose to everybody, oh, that's pretty clear. You're in absolute hot water for that. So you, as soon as you get something, especially in writing, you must disclose.
So let's just be really clear. Multiple representation is defined, everybody, by either a listing agreement or a buyer representation agreement. So if you enter in with a buyer who came to your open house on the Saturday and they're like, yeah, I'm interested, I want more information about this property. Well, you got to be a client or SRP. You know, I'm going to do the client. You sign that buyer representation agreement. Now, if it's obvious with regards to that specific property, 123 Anywhere Street, boom, you have a designated representation now, buyer relationship on that specific property, as well as one with your listing agreement. You are in multiple representation. Even though there's no offer there, it's clear that buyer representation is in regards to that trade. Now, that's my thoughts there. Again, that'll be clarified as we go through. But that's, I think, a very clear. Now, again, with regards to the timing of that, we never want to be, we want clear definition. This is an attempt to ensure clarity for everybody. I think that time is going to be clarified as we go further, just as a heads up, rather than our gut, which at this point, as Christina's mentioned, is right. As soon as you,
well, yeah, there's going to be sacrificial lambs.
There will be.
We're just going to have to wait until they get published on RICO to see what happened.
Yeah. And I should say, again, this is something that does come up currently. When do I disclose, Trevor, that there's, as soon as you possibly can. Anyways, we'll move on. With regards to forms, best practices, start having conversations with your clients with new changes coming into effect. And no doubt there will be rumblings and news about the topic. We suggest that you start having some general conversations with your clients today, include changes to legislation, how that may affect them, amending the listing agreement to include designated representation. And you do not have to have new agreements signed after December 1st on newly updated AREA paperwork. What changes?
And that's really important, Trevor, because we have had a lot of questions. Well, what have I got to do now? Go out and take new listings again? No, those contracts, and they don't expire at the end of March when the customer contracts expire. They're still in effect. But as Trevor's put in the slide here, an amendment to your agreement to include designated representative, that would be a good move with all of your listings currently.
Good. What changes were made to written agreements under TRESA? What is required from realtors? Excuse me. TRESA implements.
You want me to read for a while?
I wouldn't mind that, actually. I got to get some.
Okay, let me jump in. Okay. What changes were made to written agreements under TRESA? What is now required from realtors? TRESA implements some changes with the contents of written agreements and outlines new requirements for disclosures. And we've known this is coming. Any written agreements must clearly, comprehensively, and prominently set out in the following. In case of a listing agreement, the remuneration, that's where you get that from, Trevor, payable to any other brokerage. So it's got to be in there, which includes, if you double-ended, are you going to reduce it? If there's a, what we would call a side agreement, like if there was someone who is, like, you have to have that in writing. It can't just be a conversation you had at the table when you were taking the listing. Yeah, no, it's got to be in writing. Circumstances in which remuneration payable may change, i.e. listing brokerage assists an SRP. Of course, it's going to change. Listing brokerage acts in multiple representation. The services that a brokerage will provide under the agreement, staging, photography, house cleaning, whatever you're going to be doing for your clients, those services have to be spelled out in the agreement. The terms related to the termination of the agreement. We've always had to have that. The buyer/seller must initial next to the expiry date. The 6-month rule no longer applies. So every date has to be initialed. The brokerage shall ensure that the agreement only contains one expiry date. Exclusive listing agreements cannot be concurrent with a listing agreement for MLS. Each must have its own expiry date. One has to cease before the other can begin. And if you switch the slide for me, because North and South offices have different regulations. Only one expiry date per agreement. What does this mean to you? When you have a listing agreement that is exclusive with the intention of going to MLS, please ensure you have 2 separate listing agreements. Some of you have been using your exclusive listing agreement and then using it as part of an MLS agreement. No, 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 no. As of January 2024, listings must be loaded on the MLS system within 3 days of publicly marketing. 1 listing agreement for exclusive and 1 listing agreement for MLS with appropriate dates. Next slide. I'll just do a swish.
So Joanne, does that mean no more coming soon signs on the lawn?
Yeah, like coming soon for 3 days.
That's it, yeah.
3 days, that's it. 3 days.
I mean, I'll just
Okay.
note this section here: listing brokerage or any other party other than by the listing brokerages, gross negligence or willful acts. The seller acknowledges that the brokerage, in accordance with MLS rules and regulations and the Canadian Real Estate Association Realtor Code of Ethics, this listing shall be within 3 days of public marketing placed on an MLS system for cooperation with other realtors. So the advertising in public, 3 days.
Yeah.
Within 3 days.
Just a quick note as well, public marketing includes social media.
Yeah.
Yes, Jim, it does.
So
That's
Any
right.
type of marketing.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
means that if you have an exclusive listing and you want to have it for 2 weeks, you cannot talk about that exclusive listing on your social
Nope.
media until 3 days before it hits the MLS system.
Exactly right. Yep.
Perfect. It's so
Someone will
very
report.
clear.
Someone will report you. And the thing is, you have to keep in mind with RICO changes, if they see that, they don't even need a complaint lodged.
No.
They can put the onus on themselves to say, oh, I don't like that. Let's investigate. The other little change with that as well is RICO would typically only publish the final outcome of claims or complaints. They will start publishing right at step 1 where anything's alleged. So your information and whatever they're alleging you may have done will be on the RICO website, and it'll stay there until it's either dismissed or the judgment's been entered.
And that can take a very long time, guys. So this is tightening up on unprofessional behavior and sneaky rule breaking. So I love all this. Carry on, Trevor.
Designated representative section added. So this is different to have there. And again, initials now apply to all listing agreements, not just if it goes past the 6 months. So that's new there. And again, as we discussed last week, all the number of new forms or changes, there's, I think I want to say 27 new forms, if recollection. And then there's changes to a lot more as well. So these are the types of changes they're talking about. The fundamentals are always still there, but the tweaks are now added. Big news: mandatory buyer representation agreement. A brokerage shall, I read this earlier, a brokerage shall not enter into an agreement with a buyer or seller for purposes of trading in real estate if the agreement does not include the provision of representation. So be specific. If a buyer is looking for both a house in a particular city and a cottage property near a lake, they might want to work with different real estate agents with local and property type expertise for each property. The scope would need to be clear in each of the agreements to avoid disputes about who the buyer might have to pay if they purchase a property.
And an add-on to this, you know, you should never be working with a buyer without your BRA in place. Of course, you shouldn't be. These are one of the most, you know, problematic things that I have to deal with for agents. And the other thing that we really strongly recommend is once you get your BRA signed, take the extra step and get it registered on the buyer system. Like when it comes to a debate, an arbitration, a problem, you know, at all, the evidence is all there in writing. You have a full paper trail of what you did. Sorry, go ahead.
No, great.
Just to add to that point, Joanne, I'm pretty sure that in the TREB meeting that I was present to, they are demanding that these buyer rep agreements be submitted to the brokerage as well.
Yes, yes.
At the end of the day, you guys are liable too.
It's good practice. It's not mandated, but it is good practice to get them on the BRS. But it's not, they're actually, I think, dropping that from TRESA in order for us to keep them as a brokerage. But I think that's one of the discussions that's still being had.
Now, actually, Michael, you bring up a really good point. It is by the brokerages, not just policies, but we are actually mandated to retrieve. We have, of course, listing agreements with your clients under fiduciary duties as of today. Many of you do not submit your buyer representation agreements until you have a successful sale. And this is something we need to clarify, but I'm pretty sure any buyer representation agreement that you do get must be submitted, as you do with a listing agreement, must be submitted to the brokerage.
Absolutely.
That's a contract that we are all held on. Even if it's designated representation, the brokerage holds all liability. And I think that will become an easy target at one point, not immediately, but at one point by RICO inspectors, of which we know that they're increasing and adding headcount there to go out into the market to inspect brokerages. We will need all buyer representation agreements, not because we want to take up the space, but we are required to, and we hold that liability, just to be clear on that.
And the new insertion for the buyer to initial that they haven't signed another buyer contract with another agent, that should help as well, because again, that's a really common problem that we run into. Your buyer signed up with a couple of people, so that should really help as well.
If you do need to add a new designated agent, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're going out of town, in order to, let's say Jim is working with a buyer right now and he wants Michael, hey, I'm going on holidays to Fiji, can you cover me for the next 2 weeks? You will require an amendment to that buyer representation agreement to have now Michael during that period of time to be a designated representative.
Trevor, it's now 12:45. Should we wrap up now and build in another day? I know we've got Christmas families next Wednesday. Is it possible we build in another day on Monday to finish this off and then open it up for questions?
Yeah, I think so.
People like, yeah. Would you like to see that, everyone? Next Monday at 11?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good.
Yes.
Because I think what would be really good is, you know, I have to say I'm so impressed with our presentation and the detail of it. Thank you guys. I got a great team here. It's amazing. But again, let's continue this through, because I do think your questions will open up scenarios that are day to day for you that you'll have to be dealing with. So, is that okay, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, as an option as well, we could always do a breakout session during the Christmas party on next Friday, if that's something you want to do.
Yeah, that could be like how you win a prize at the party if you can answer a TRESA question.
Ooh, I think that'd be fun.
And
Anyway,
there's an AREA webinar today. It's their first one on the AREA forum. So if you can jump
Yes.
on that at 1 o'clock, maybe you get some questions going that you want to, because we have a lot of good ones. I got some private ones. So we'll work through all those and anything else that comes up.
good.
Great.
Again, so we'll wrap this up. Really appreciate everybody's patience. That was a little bit awkward when our power went out. Thanks for sticking around. And for those of you who are carrying conversations, we all appreciate that. And they were all great questions, it sounded like as well. But this is an ongoing process. We're going to continue, and we'll review over and over and over again as you guys have those questions. But I hope everybody's starting to feel like there's going to be a sense of direction and clarity at some point. And we'll get through it over the next couple of weeks initially, and learn together into the future. So anyways, again, thanks everybody for sticking around and listening.
Thanks,
and
guys.
we'll cue
Thank
something
you.
up for Monday at 11 a.m. But we will confirm that via email. Thanks, guys.
That's okay. Okay, bye.
Great. Thanks. Bye.